Respect is everything. My father used to say that with a calm, dangerous voice, the kind that made even silence feel like a threat. When I was a boy, I thought respect meant obedience. I thought love meant fear, because in our house, love always came with conditions. My father had this way of turning every moment into a lesson. If I spilled my drink, he'd sigh, "Can't even hold a glass properly. What's wrong with you?" If I got an A, he'd ask, "Only an A. Where's the A?" And when I tried to tell him how I felt, he'd just shake his head and say, "You're too sensitive. Toughen up." So I did. I learned to stay quiet, to measure every word, to smile when I wanted to cry. But in our house, peace was a performance, and I was always on stage. My mother, she was different, but somehow the same. She played the victim role so well it almost seemed real. If my father yelled, she'd whisper to me later, "Don't make him angry, darling. You know how he gets." She never stopped him. She just made excuses for him and for herself. Sometimes she'd cry in her room, and I'd feel guilty for not being enough to make her happy. That's how narcissistic families work. They hand you their pain and call it love. By the time I turned 16, I stopped trying to please him, but the damage was done. I'd flinch at raised voices. I'd apologize for things that weren't my fault. And every time I looked in the mirror, I'd hear his voice whispering, "You'll never be good enough." He didn't have to shout anymore. His words were living in my head rent-free. Leaving for college was like breathing for the first time. No shouting, no walking on eggshells, just quiet. But quiet can be dangerous too, because when the external noise is gone, you start hearing everything you've buried. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, feeling guilty for being happy. That's the thing about growing up with narcissistic parents. You mistake relief for betrayal. Years passed. I built a life that didn't revolve around pleasing anyone, but they always found a way to pull me back in. Phone calls filled with guilt. "You never visit anymore. Your mother misses you. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." And like clockwork, that old familiar shame would return. So I'd visit, bring gifts, and pretend we were a normal family. Until one night, it was my father's birthday. We were at the dinner table, him talking about himself, my mother nodding like an echo. Then he turned to me. "You know, son, you've changed. You used to listen. You used to respect us." And in that moment, something inside me just broke. I looked right at him and said quietly, "No, Dad, I used to fear you. There's a difference." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout I'd ever heard. My mother gasped. My father's face turned red, but for the first time in my life, I didn't back down. I didn't apologize. I just stood up and left. That night, I drove 4 hours with no destination, just putting distance between us. I cried, then I laughed. Then I cried again. It was like grieving someone who wasn't he dead, The version of my parents I had always hoped they could be. And maybe that's the hardest part about breaking free. You don't just lose them. You lose the fantasy that one day they'd finally love you the way you needed. It's been 5 years since that night. They still call sometimes. The messages are the same manipulation wrapped in concern. But I've learnt to recognize it now. I've learnt that love without respect isn't love. It's control. And that saying no doesn't make me ungrateful. It makes me whole. Last week, I saw a father in the park with his little boy. The boy tripped, scraped his knee, and started crying. The father knelt down, hugged him, and said, "It's okay, I've got you." For a second, I felt that old ache again, the one that whispers, "Asterisk, I wish I had that asterisk." But then I smiled. Because I realized that one day, if I ever have a child, that's the kind of father I'll be. The cycle ends with me. So, to every son or daughter who grew up apologizing for existing you, don't owe your parents your pain. You don't have to earn love by shrinking yourself. Sometimes walking away isn't disrespect. Sometimes it's the first real act of self-respect you'll ever make. You're not broken. You're just finally free. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing. It means a lot to know we're not alone in this journey.